Nose 15. I had my first girlfriend. We lived in an upper-class area, very quiet and peaceful streets. My girlfriend, Casey, also lived 2 blocks away, so I could walk to her house almost nightly. One Thursday night during break when I had nothing to do, I started my walk over to Casey's house. It was on the later side of the night, but I didn't really have a curfew, so it didn't matter. But pretty soon, I thought I could start hearing noises from around me. And when I say around me, I mean mostly behind me. The first time I heard it, it was the sound of a bush being shaken a bit. I only turned my head to look for a second without stopping. I just started to walk a little faster as all. When I got to the next block, I heard another noise, a twig or a small stick cracking. I stopped this time and turned around. All I saw was the empty street and the bushes that lined up along each property to separate the sidewalks from people's properties. Basically, next to the street was a wall of bushes, and I didn't see anyone or anything that could be making these weird sounds. I picked up the pace even more, and I was reaching the home stretch to Casey's house. Of course, there was another sound again, this time more like footsteps, quick light footsteps. I turned again without stopping, no one, nothing. I could see Casey's house now. I called, and she picked up right away. I told her how freaked out I was getting because I kept hearing noises. I walked around the bushes surrounding her driveway and stepped onto her property. I noticed her staring out her bedroom window upstairs. She waved at me as she left on the phone, and I waved back. Then she asked me, "Who was that guy right behind you?" I turned right around and saw a fully grown man crouched, walking maybe 10 feet behind me. I screamed and ran for the door and started pounding on it. The man grabbed me and tried to put me in some kind of headlock, but he let go and ran away pretty quickly. Casey's mom opened the door with a look of dismay on her face. She let me in and slammed the door shut as Casey came running over. I was out of breath and felt like my heart was beating 1,000 beats a minute. Casey's mom hugged me and asked a few questions, then called the police to warn of a dangerous man going around town. Casey's mom let me stay over that night for obvious reasons, and she drove me home the next day. It was a dangerously stormy night. Everyone in my family was doing their own thing. I was in my room watching TV, my parents were in the living room watching some comedy show, and my sister was playing video games upstairs. I usually enjoyed stormy nights like this because it made me feel relaxed. I was relaxed until there was a monstrous bang on my window. I jumped up and looked outside. There was someone outside my window, but the large amount of rain pouring down the window kind of blurred his face. He started pounding at my window. It sounded like he was screaming for help. I opened the window just a crack, and he screamed and urged me in a hurry. The rain was so loud I had to scream at him to come around front, then I shut my window. I ran outside to the living room to tell my dad that there's a man who seems to be in distress and screaming for help outside. And then came the knocks and shouts for help outside our front door. My dad was about to open the front door, but I stopped him. I said, "Wait," because I wasn't sure if it was a good idea. When the phone rang and on the TV, it displayed the caller ID of our next-door neighbor, my dad ran to pick it up. When I heard him say, "No F*** King way," I knew something was wrong. He hung up the phone and said, "Stay away from the door." He didn't explain why, he just went to the window to peek at the front stoop. There is where he said he saw a guy crouched down, pounding on the door, holding some kind of large sharp tool. My dad yelled through the front door at the man to go away before the cops get here. Then he actually got on the phone with the cops. Eventually, the man outside gave up, and he disappeared. The next time we checked, when my dad was on the phone with a neighbor, he told my dad that he saw some homeless-looking guy rummaging through his shed and came out with a large chopping axe. The cops found the crazed man wandering around the streets, and it made it in the newspaper a few days later. One night when I was a really young kid, I was in the living room watching my favorite cartoon. I had the TV pretty loud, but I thought I could hear my mom calling my name from downstairs. I called back, but she didn't answer, so I guess she couldn't hear me. I heard her call me again, so I went down to the basement. The lights were off, so halfway down, I called for my mom, but she didn't answer. I didn't know where she could be calling me from, but one thing was for certain, she wasn't in the basement. I started going back up the stairs, but before I even got to the top stair, I heard my mom's voice again from down in the basement, calling my name. I looked down into the pitch blackness. I ran back up to the top step, turned on the lights, and walked halfway back down, peeking into the basement. I didn't see my mom anywhere down there. Suddenly, I got a huge rush of horror. I ran up the stairs, basically crying for my mom. She came rushing down the stairs from upstairs, and I cried to her that something was calling me from downstairs that sounded just like her. She swore to me that she hadn't been calling me. She went down to the basement to check and make me feel better, but I didn't feel better. I'm sure she didn't believe me. Why would she? I was a little kid, but I still know that I heard what I heard. My grandpa recently told me a story about a night. He took his dog for a walk. He used to have a small Boston Terrier named Sherry, named after an old friend of his who passed away. My grandpa lives about 2 hours from us on a farm, and there's not much that goes on there. He lives with his wife, Marianne, whom he married about 15 years back. Every day, Marianne would take Sherry for a walk in the morning, and my grandpa would take her for a walk in the evening. On a regular walk during sunset, my grandpa was walking Sherry down the usual dirt path that ran along the woods next to their property. My grandpa passed by another person on the trail, who Sherry instinctively barked and pulled towards, like most dogs do when they see strangers. My grandpa said hello to the stranger, who had a large hood up, but the stranger just walked past without even batting an eye. So, he and the dog kept walking. Sherry kept looking back every so often and barking. However, my grandpa was home to shush and yank at the leash to keep him walking. Eventually, my grandpa turned around to look at what Sherry could be barking at. The stranger who passed him by a few minutes earlier was stalking him from behind a tree in the near distance. My grandpa decided to pick up the pace as fast as possible. At his old age, he always carries pepper spray in his big coat pocket, just in case. He was getting closer to the house when suddenly he heard clicks from the leaves on the ground inches behind him. But before he could turn, he felt the warmth of a glove cover his mouth and nose, preventing him from screaming or breathing. My grandpa says he could hear Sherry barking and biting at the stranger, which might have helped loosen the man's grip a little. My grandpa struggled to grab the pepper spray out from his pocket, but when he did, he sprayed it at least 10 times, continuing even after the man holding him let go and started to scream. My grandpa came as close as he could to a run to escape back to his house. He was perfectly okay. I grew up in California for the first 14 years of my life. Our neighborhood wasn't the best, namely because it was an area where the Crips were known to reside. If you don't know, the Crips are members of one of the biggest Los Angeles street gangs. My best friend, who I always called Stevie D, lived 2 doors down. We had other friends, of course, but we would often hang out just he and I. We'd usually ride our bikes together around town or play video games, just basic kid stuff. When we were 12, we were biking around the neighborhood one night and decided to visit a well-known abandoned house. It had been uninhabited for many years because no one would buy it for whatever reason. When we pulled up on our bikes to the front of the house, Stevie pointed to the window and said, "Look." I pushed my bike a little closer to the window and focused my vision on it. I could see someone peeking out the window. I couldn't tell if they were looking at us or not, but it was definitely a person's face sitting between the curtains. It was extremely strange considering the place had been abandoned for years. We stared for longer than we should have, perhaps, and noticed something else that was strange. The person didn't move their face at all. We inched a little closer onto the empty driveway. Actually, upon getting closer, it appeared to be a Halloween decoration or something, like a fake head. This meant someone had snuck into the house to put it there. Stevie D and I, being the mischievous kids we used to be, hatched an idea to sneak in through the back somehow and check out the place. We hid our bikes on the side of the house behind an overgrown bush, then snuck into the yard. To our surprise, the back door was already unlocked. But when we came to think of it, it wasn't that surprising considering it seemed someone had already broken in to put that fake head there. We stepped into the house, but we didn't want to turn the lights on and expose the fact that we were in the house. It was dark in there, but not pitch black, so we could make our way through the house. We got to the living room first because we wanted to check out that fake head thing at the window. It smelled really bad in that room, though. I picked up the head from the windowsill and immediately dropped it and screamed. I dropped it not because it was surprisingly heavy, but because it also felt like real skin. I saw a dark liquid pouring out from the bottom of the head that was now on the floor. It was blood. It was a real human head. There were 2 cracks in the ceiling above us. Stevie and I looked at each other with our mouths hanging open. We ran for the back door and got back on our bikes to get the hell out of there. Anyone in our immediate area learned pretty soon that the head belonged to a victim of the Crips, who apparently placed the head there as some kind of message. I don't think anyone knew the full story, but there was a good chance whoever placed that head there was still in the house because Stevie and I both heard cracks in the ceiling above us, as if someone was coming downstairs. Last year, a guy came to my house's door around 9 p.m. He knocked on the door, so I got my mom, and she went out to see who it was. By the way, we live in a rural area, so visits like that are extremely uncommon and strange. The guy talked to my mom about how he was opening a business, asked whether she liked American-made products, then handed her a Clorox container as a sample. He went back to his minivan and opened it to get a quote-unquote vacuum cleaner. When my mom saw 5 other men sitting inside, she told me to run and get my phone since we don't have a landline. I couldn't find it, so I got my knife and stood around the corner. She threw the container outside and told them to get the hell off her property, as well as that she was calling the cops. They peeled out of the driveway, and we never saw the car again.